So here we are. This is our last session in this very short series, and I wanted to say thank you for sharing your Sunday mornings with us, with Shalini and I, and our guests. And thank you to Catamount Arts, and thank you to the Vermont Humanities Council for making this all possible. And I can promise you this, that we will be doing this again, and with your feedback, we'll make it even better. So yeah, I'm just really appreciative right now of all of you folks in this room and all the folks who aren't here today, but who have joined us over the last 4 weeks. I'm gonna get started by sharing my screen. Okay. So each session, we start off always with a land acknowledgement, and we acknowledge that we live and work on Abenaki land. We recognize the indigenous culture and people that existed in Indokina long before Europeans arrived in North America. We commit to policies and practices of cultural equity to benefit current and future generations. We believe that acknowledging the continuous presence and stewardship of Indigenous people is one more step toward creating a more just and equitable community. Let us use our spheres of influence as courageous conversation learners to rebuild our understanding of history in a way that amplifies the voices and lived experience of the marginalized people, past, present, and future.
Thanks, Molly. Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here also. Really feeling thirsty to listen and to share and to learn with all of you. But a few quick reminders before we start. So Molly and I are recording this session, and we want to assure you that for the discussion portions of the time together, we keep those private for just all of us who are here. So those portions of the recording will never be shared with in public or in the links that we post. So you can feel free to speak out and to speak up. Even though this is the last session, I just want to remind you that there's going to be one more weekly email that'll show up in your inbox. And we want you to it'll probably take you just 3 to 5 minutes to fill out a survey. And that's the one Molly was referring to. If we could get your feedback, I think it would really help inform how we design the future series. So thank you in advance for your help in doing that. And lastly, I want to let all of you know that sadly, due to another responsibility, I'm going to have to leave our session today a little bit early, which means we're going to be running a slightly different kind of question and answer period. Molly will remind you about it when we get to that point of the session. But the main thing that you need to know and to remember is we're asking that you please put your questions into the main chat. So not private messages to me or Molly, but just questions in the main chat. Or if you prefer, you could raise your hand, one of those two options. And on a related note, since I'm going to be leaving early, I wanted to take just a moment to say that I feel like these courageous conversation sessions, they have actually meant a lot to me. They've been really meaningful. And I think part of it is I'm super energized by getting to work with Molly. So just doing the planning and has been kind of exciting and energizing. And then I was pretty thrilled that we had a chance to talk to some on-being staff. And then we got this amazing slate of speakers, and everything just kept building and getting better and better. And then I have to say, you've kind of topped it off, the cherry on top. I've really been dazzled by a lot of the questions. I think there's been a depth in parts of the conversations it's very powerful. And so I'm really grateful to everyone who's participated. And I just want to thank you very much for making this journey so rich. So with that, I'd like to introduce our fabulous speaker. I know that's who you've been waiting for. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about Sue. So our speaker is Sue McCormack, She is the founder of an amazing organization called Creative Discourse. And she is also a senior associate with another great organization called Everyday Democracy. Right now, the first one of those two, Creative Discourse, is transforming into a multiracial collaborative of a group of experienced associates who hold deep expertise in community change and in equity, diversity, and inclusion work. So through that organization, through working with Creative Discourse, Sue has worked with municipalities, school districts, organizations in Vermont and all over New England to design and implement very productive processes that lead to change. Sue is a student of the ways of racism, implicit bias, and whiteness impact on our public institutions. And she has a special interest in helping people build their awareness and capacity to apply an equity lens to their community change work. She co-authored Facing Racism in a Diverse Nation, which is an everyday democracy discussion guide. And it's being used around the country to help communities address race relations and racial equity. In recent years, Sue's worked with the Nellie Mae Foundation, Everyday Democracy, and Great Schools Partnership, providing technical assistance to school districts around New England to build their capacity to create more equitable school systems. She is a 2005 graduate of the Vermont Leadership Institute, which is often referred to as the VLI. And after graduating, she later served as the director of leadership at VLI. And she continues her connection with them, has been one of the faculty members since 1999. Last and certainly not least, Sue lives in a very lively neighborhood in Essex Junction with her wife, Linda, and their dog, Octavia. So with that, I will turn the floor over to Sue.
Thank you so much, Shalini. Good morning, everybody. I'm so happy to be here with you, and I feel so honored that Molly and Shalini asked me to be part of this series. You've had the chance to hear from some just really wonderful speakers, and I really admire the construct of this series and that you all have been showing up on Sunday morning. So thanks for being here one more time with me. The session that Susanna Davis led, she said, "You know what to do." And then in Susan Clark's session, she said, "You know how to be." And what I would say is, I think this condition of whiteness actually makes it pretty hard for us to know what to do. And it makes it pretty hard for us to know how to be. And so we've got to deal with this social construct of whiteness in order to know what to do and how to be. And I think I'll start with telling a story about something that happened to me. I think it was about 10 years ago. And at that time, I was working a lot with Everyday Democracy. So I was flying around the country and I was helping communities around the country have conversations about their community, the future of their community. And at Everyday Democracy, we had two twin concerns, which are still my concerns and passions. And one was around helping communities strengthen their local democracy. And the other was around dealing with racial inequity. Because in our view, you can't have the strongest possible, most resilient communities when there are groups of people, because of their racial identity or other marginal identities, that don't have a voice and are left behind. And so I was doing this work around the country. And I don't know if any of you who fly a lot have this experience, but when you have a layover and you get from your first flight to the second flight that's going to Burlington, Vermont, and you kind of know everyone in the waiting room. It's such a great feeling. Well, that day I didn't recognize anyone, but when I got onto the plane, I was seated next to this African-American gentleman. He was about 60 years old, very distinguished looking. He had on a bow tie and a button-down sweater. And his demeanor reminded me of a Mr. Rogers, just very kind character. And so we struck up a conversation. We were having a great conversation, just, I don't know, making small talk. And then I found out that he lived in Vermont. And then we found out that we both lived in Essex. And finally, we found out we actually lived on the same block in the same neighborhood. And I said, "Oh, how do you like Essex?" And he said, "Well, I like Essex just fine, except all of the racist things that happened to me and my wife." And in that moment, I was about to cause serious harm to this person, even though I didn't realize it at the time. And what I did was I raised my eyebrow and I looked at him and I said, "Really?" And as soon as I had that reaction, he turned away from me, he faced forward, and we never spoke for the rest of the flight. And at the time, I didn't know, what did I say? You know, what happened there? About 2 weeks later, I was at our grocery store and there was a young teenager, African American, bagging groceries, and a white man in a baseball cap, was getting irritated, and he was going a little slower than the man wanted to, and he made a terrible racial slur to this kid, and it was horrible. And this beautiful young man who was joking around and having a great time with the cashier, the smile left his face, his eyes filled up, and he just looked like he had physically been punched. And it was a horrible moment. And I said something in that moment. The man had quickly left, but I acknowledged what had happened, and we had a little bit of a conversation. Uh, a week later, I ran into my seatmate from the airplane on the street, and I was able to offer him an apology and let him know that that was really awful, that I didn't just believe his experience. And we actually became friends. But the thing about this story that really shook me up is, how did I react with disbelief to this man's comment that he was experiencing racist things? This was my work. I was flying around the country helping communities deal with this. How could I have so much denial in myself? And I realized that I could deal with the fact that there was racism in the abstract, but I did not want to admit that it was happening right in my own neighborhood. Being able to live in that denial is a key feature of whiteness, right? Because people of color, they don't get to have that experience. They have to deal with the reality of our country day in and day out. But as white people, we kind of have a choice. And so breaking through that denial is, it's not an easy thing to do. And I guess maybe I'll talk a little bit about a metaphor that I've come to understand to kind of explain how things have got that way. But I want to leave time to answer this question that somebody asked: how does white supremacy show up right now? Because there's lots of ways it shows up, and what can we do about it? And also, before I just continue on, I also want to acknowledge something else. One of the things that I've learned in my work is to center, to the best of my ability, and I always often don't get it right, the voices of Black and Brown, Indigenous people, people who hold other marginalized identities, young people sometimes, to really center those voices in our work. And so today I'm not doing that, right? I'm centering my experience as a white person and our experiences, because I do think there is a place for us dealing with our whiteness. You know, James Baldwin talked a lot about how whiteness is something white people have to deal with. And so today I am making an exception, right? And focusing on us as white people. But I will say that when we're doing work and we have the gift of being in a room with people of color, the very best thing we can do is take a deep breath and sit back and listen, because there's wisdom and experience there that actually we're not going to have. And so in thinking about this work, I'm just going to share this metaphor. I hope it's helpful to some of you. And again, I didn't write this down. I've written about this years ago, but let's see if it resonates with anyone. So I've come to think of it this way. I've come to think of it as if our country has been built around this big muddy pond of racism. And in the pond is this toxic stew. It is the legacy of the genocide of Indigenous people, the enslavement of African Americans for 400 years. Jim Crow laws are in there, redlining, unfair hiring practices, all of the systems that we've created over hundreds of years, right, to kind of maintain our racial caste system that we have in this country. And so in that muddy pond, there has been a lot of incredible suffering. Many, many people have died. But there's also another thing that's happened in this inhospitable place, which is that a lot of people of color have created community and made incredible contributions to our country. So I'm going to get back to that in a minute. But then let's imagine what's happened. So the muddy pond is in the middle, and then a lot of white people are around the pond, right? And we're up on the banks. And we're actually, many of us, not all of us, someone talked about intersectionality before, but for this metaphor, we're going to kind of keep it simple. Many white people are up on the banks around the pond, and we have pretty comfortable lives up there, especially materially comfortable, right? Many of us have been able to own homes, go to college, get wealth that was passed down to us from our parents. So we're pretty comfortable up there. But there's some problems up there too. We've actually given up a lot to be up there. And I can just share my own experience. So in my experience, my great grandparents came here from Ireland and Italy and Russia. So on one side of my family were Russian Jews. And they were so intent on becoming white that I have no cultural or any kind of the goods of what they brought with them. My grandmother's family was intent on not speaking Italian. They had this beautiful family tree in Italian. They burned it in a fire. On my mother's side of the family, my grandparents totally gave up any semblance of their Jewish heritage, and they celebrated Christmas and Easter, and they just had this weird kind of pretending that they were white. And, it did not stop my mom from getting beat up and kind of tortured throughout her childhood because the whole community knew they were Jewish. But I never went to a Shabbat. I never got to experience any of those beautiful Jewish cultural traditions. And so in my life, I have one Italian recipe that we make at Christmas. But other than that, a lot of those the music and the culture have been lost to me. So that's a price that I've had to come to terms with in my own life. And again, it's hard talking about whiteness. I don't want to equivocate that price, right, with the suffering and the price that BIPOC people have paid, but it's still important for us to be aware of what we've lost in becoming this thing called white. I don't think a moral imperative is enough for us to, like Dennis said, just be in this phase and then let it pass. We have to be in touch with what whiteness has cost us as white people to have the motivation to go on with this work, which is very hard. There's another thing that happens up on this shore. It's really hard for us to be in community with each other. And my BIPOC colleagues remind me all the time that they notice that it's very hard for white people to be in true community, right? We've got this big, toxic, muddy pond in the middle, and we're kind of all the way on the edge. And so community is difficult. So what happens up there? Well, we try not to look down, right? Because it's uncomfortable to see our history and all that injustice and suffering. So we're just kind of looking across at each other, but not really in community. But once in a while, something happens and we fall in the pond, right? And the most recent something was the murder of George Floyd, right? A lot of us fell in the pond. Watching that murder on TV was too much for many of us. There's lots of other examples. When Emmett Till was murdered, after Hurricane Katrina, when we watched Black and brown people on their roofs for days without food or water or being rescued, and asked ourselves, is this our country, right? And so what happens when we fall in the pond? A couple of things. One thing is that most of us get the hell out as fast as we can, right? I mean, it's uncomfortable in there. And so we just want to get out. But here's another thing that happens sometimes. We fall in that pond and we don't know how to swim. And instead of looking around at the BIPOC people who have been in there for hundreds of years, and by the way, many of people who have perished in there, but also think about the amazing life rafts that BIPOC people have built in this awful stew, right? They have come together and made incredible contributions to our country in the areas of education and science and medicine and arts and culture, right? So they've learned how to deal with this muddy water. And so we fall in as white people sometimes, and we don't know how to swim, and we're splashing around. And then because we're used to being at the top of our racial hierarchy, what do? We are like, hey, I'm here, I'm gonna help. Like, I'm gonna come in here and save us, and I've got some ideas about what to do. And just imagine how annoying that is, right? You know, we're kind of half drowning, and, you know, we don't want to take people down with us. So one of the things that I've realized is that if we're going to stay in that water and try to transform it, right, from that muddy pond into some kind of life-giving liquid, we've got to learn how to swim in there. We have to find other white people in there that we can build true community with. We have to, Barbara, we have to be willing to make mistakes. We're going to screw this up, right? Because we're new in there. We're going to say the wrong thing. We're going to cause harm when we don't intend to. And so we really have to be prepared to be in community with each other, to make mistakes, to have some humility. And the other thing we really have to do is to listen to our Indigenous and Black and Brown brothers and sisters who really know what they're doing in there. You know, they've been in there navigating that. And so, you know, the ways that I try to stay in, and by the way, I come out from, I would like to say that I'm just in there all the time in my life and my work, but that's not true. The truth is sometimes I crawl back out because it's hard, right? But I do try to stay in as much as possible. And so what do? I build community with other white people. I read a lot of books, and I watch movies, and I try to build my understanding. I try to listen really carefully to people of color who have expertise. And I am committed to being in there. And then I try to change my practice. So again, like today, I changed a practice. Instead of trying to come in here and give some like expert talk with data points, I just listened first before I spoke. Every day I try to change my practice so that I am not perpetuating white supremacy culture, which is so ingrained in us and how we normally do things. And I try to approach things in a different way. So much of this work is about us being in community with each other. This is way too big or hard for us to go it alone. It really is. And so finding ways to build community is just super important. I'll also say that, you know, I was really interested in what Yola Bliss said about trying to find a productive way forward with guilt. I have to kind of disagree with that. I don't think guilt is that helpful. You know, I do not feel guilty that I am a white person. I was born into this body, into this situation that we find ourselves in. So I'm not gonna, I think it's kind of self-indulgent to just, you know, stew in guilt about this. We are where we are. And, but I make no apologies for the fact that the construct of whiteness doesn't work for me anymore. And it certainly doesn't work for the BIPOC people that have suffered so much because of it. So I stay in as much as I can. I want to have full community with white people. And I also, you know, I'm a person that has a family that has Black people and white people in it. I don't like that wedge between us. I want to get rid of that, you know, and I know that that won't happen in my lifetime, but I'm going to keep working on it. And I also stay in there because, you know, I do believe in the ideals of this country. We have screwed it up a lot, but there's some really good ideals in our founding documents, and I want to help create a more perfect union. That matters to me. So Dennis, I'm in this for the long haul. I don't know how effective I'll be, but this is my life's journey and my passion. And I'm just so glad that all of you are here and that you're in it too right now. And I hope that we can all kind of together keep going forward. And I think I'll end with just, you know, Brian Stevenson says a wonderful thing, and he's the author of Just Mercy and has done some amazing work working with people who are incarcerated and really have had a hard time in life. And what he says is that we are not bound together by our accomplishments, but we're really bound together by our brokenness. You know, and it's in those broken places where we're looking for healing and community, and where we really can see that, you know, our liberation really is bound up together. This isn't about us white people like trying to be, you know, good people. It's about our own salvation. And so my hope is we can all find ways to work together to start to make that come true. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sue. And thank you, everyone. I'm going to open it up here in a second to chat again, and you can speak up if you have questions or want to discuss the podcast. But I just wanted to take a moment to thank everyone in this room and to recognize the comments from some folks. Julie, I heard you loud and clear. Dennis, I heard you loud and clear. I want to just remind everyone here that we're all on this journey. We all jumped on the train at different times. And some of us are ready to change things at the policy level, and we should be doing that. And some folks are just learning what white supremacy culture is. What is that? What does that even mean? And I just want to point out one thing as we move into the discussion. If anyone felt in their gut some you know, bad feelings or like feelings of discomfort during any time in this discussion in this past 40 minutes, those are the points that we should, and I'm no expert, please, I'm no expert, so I will be very humble in saying this, but those are the points where we need to stop, reflect, don't react in the moment, but that is the point that we need to work on. And so if any of those points came up for you all during this discussion, I would love to hear about it, or you can ignore what I just said and go right to Sue and ask her the questions. And let's move into the discussion part. And my main point is I appreciate all of you being in here during this journey.